Hello everyone, let's discuss today's the Hindu editorial analysis. The first article is the issue of genocide and the World Court. In this article, the writer says that South Africa initiated proceedings against Israel in the International Court of Justice, ICJ, on December 29, 2023, arguing that Israel's military operations in Gaza violated the Genocide Convention. The ICJ held a hearing on provisional measures on January 12, 2024, where South Africa and Israel were given 3 hours each to present their cases. A ruling from the World Court on the issue of provisional measures is awaited. The case has generated immense debate, with Bangladesh, Jordan, Germany, and other Latin American and Middle Eastern countries expressing support for South Africa's application and opposition from the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. South Africa claims standing to bring this case to the ICJ, as it is technically unrelated to the conflict in Gaza. The crime of genocide is characterized by actions intended to destroy a defined group of people, and every state has an obligation to prevent the occurrence of genocide. South Africa claims standing to bring this case to the ICJ, as it is technically unrelated to the conflict in Gaza. The Gambia has also obtained provisional measures against Myanmar for the Rohingya genocide. However, demonstrating the existence of the crime of genocide requires demonstrating specific intent, which is often a tall order. South Africa's request for provisional measures and the hearing on January 12 were particularly important, as they are equivalent to interim orders issued pending the final determination of a case. South Africa argued that high-level Israeli politicians had made genocide statements, which were then echoed by soldiers on the ground in Gaza. Israel argued that there was no dispute between the parties and that these statements were open to multiple interpretations and did not reflect operational protocols of the army. The International Criminal Court, ICJ, is considering the plausibility requirement for South Africa's immediate cessation of military hostilities in Gaza. Experts suggest that the court may not be able to go as far as it has done in the Ukraine versus Russia case, but the core issue is how it will tailor its provisional measures. Alternatives include compelling Israel to allow food and other resources into Gaza, a humanitarian ceasefire, or directing Israeli leaders to refrain from making further genocidal statements. The court also has the power to craft its own interim measures beyond what the parties have asked for. The ICJ proceedings are one-sided, with only Israel in the dock, not Hamas. Hamas officials and Israeli officials can be proceeded against at the International Criminal Court, ICC, which is a different body from the ICJ. This would require the situation in Palestine, Israel, to be referred for investigation to the ICC, which has already been done. No further steps have been taken by the ICC. The split between countries has led to debate, with some countries advocating an opposite position in the South Africa versus Israel case. This is not entirely coincidental, as modern international law was invented by the Imperial West to safeguard its own material interests. The ICJ's order on provisional measures is vital primarily for helping mitigate and imposing legal accountability for the suffering in Gaza, but it is also a vital stress test of the rules-based international order. The next article is India's problem: different drugs, identical brand names. In this article, the writer says that Dr. Vincent Raikumar, an oncologist, expressed his shock on social media about the fact that 2 different drugs treating entirely different conditions had identical brand names, Linamac and Medzole. The use of identical trade names for drugs with different active ingredients is an old problem in India, and the medical community has been complaining about the issue for several decades. The most popular example cited by doctors is the brand name Medzole, which is used by 4 different companies to sell 4 different active ingredients treating entirely different medical conditions. For example, one company uses Medzole to sell a drug containing midazolam, which is used as a sedative. The second company uses Medzol DSR to sell a combination of domperidone and pantoprazole, which is used to treat stomach acidity. A third company uses Medzol 400G for a formulation containing albendazole that is used in deworming treatment for children. A fourth company uses Medzol 200 for a formulation containing itraconazole, which is a powerful antifungal drug used to treat diseases such as black fungus. The more widespread problem is the use of similar trade names which are phonetically and visually similar. For example, while one company uses the brand Medpol to sell paracetamol, another company uses the brand Medrol to sell a corticosteroid, and a third company uses Metrazole to sell an antibiotic. These names sound phonetically similar to Medzol and also to each other, with only a letter or two substituted. It is not always that different companies use identical or similar names to sell different active ingredients. Sometimes, the same company will harvest a successful brand name for one formulation to promote a second formulation. For example, the company that uses the brand name iPill to sell an emergency contraceptive, ECP, containing levonorgestrel, uses the brand name iPill Daily as a daily contraceptive pill containing levonorgestrel and ethinylestradiol. The use of such identical or similar names is especially worrying in a country like India for two reasons. First, the packaging of all drugs in India bears the name and prescription advice in the English language, a language spoken by less than 10% of the population. Second, Indian pharmacies are poorly regulated. Many pharmacies routinely dispense drugs without prescriptions, and some do not comply with the legal requirement to operate only with trained pharmacists registered with the Pharmacy Council of India. These factors already increase the possibility of errors in prescribing drugs. The Supreme Court has recommended that the use of similar or identical trade names for drugs has been known for several decades. The Supreme Court has ruled that the use of similar or identical trade names for drugs can lead to serious consequences for patients and the medical community. The next article is Dangerous Status Quo. In Manipur, unless non-state actors are demilitarized, hostilities will persist. In this article, the writer says that 8 months after ethnic violence broke out between Meitei and Kuki-Zo communities in Manipur, hostilities continue. Ethnic polarization persists, with displaced people on both sides unable to return to their homes. Schooling and healthcare remain disrupted, and the state government's writing does not run in the Kuki-Zo Hill areas. The government's inability to win peace and failure of institutions like the State Assembly to deliberate on the problem have compounded the conflict. Even media and civil society organizations seem divided on ethnic lines, and the role of the army and central paramilitary forces is being seen through this lens. The Union government's response has been based on a smoke and mirrors approach, assuming powers related to law and order enforcement without publicly denying the imposition of Article 355. There has been little follow-up on confidence-building measures between ethnic groups, and the predominant presence of militant outfields is alarming. Militias such as Meitei Radical Arambai Tengol have been allowed to act as defense squads, brandishing weapons and being allowed to vitiate the already perilous discourse in the valley. Arms looted from police stations and camps have not been recovered, suggesting a dangerous militarization of non-state groups. The Union government must focus on addressing this key issue on either side of the divide. Mr. Singh has tried to link the prevailing conflict and ethnic polarization to the refugee situation in Manipur, with many, predominantly from the Chin communities, fleeing the civil war in Myanmar. The next article is Choppy Waters, India, and the Maldives must persist with quiet diplomacy to reset ties. In this article, the writer says that India and the Maldives are dealing with another controversy over the Chinese research ship Xiang Yanghong 03, expected to dock in Mail in February. India has made its concerns over Chinese ships in the Indian Ocean clear, and New Delhi managed to ensure that Colombo banned all foreign research ships from visiting there from 2024. The new government of President Muizu has scrapped the India-Maldives hydrography agreement, and both sides have been engaged in bilateral negotiations on tricky issues. Prime Minister Narendra Modi met with Muizu in December and set up a high-level core group for bilateral negotiations on tricky issues. External Affairs. Minister S. Jaishankar also met with his Maldivian counterpart last week. Both sides should realize that their tensions are symptomatic of larger problems. One, a regional power aspiring to be a global power, and the other, an archipelago dependent on external forces. It is important for both sides to see the benefit of a détente over confrontation. For India, whose neighborhood first policy focuses on helping its neighbors' priorities, it is unavoidably seen as foisting its military, which has carried out humanitarian operations on the Maldives. For the Muizu government, the impact of the animus with India on upcoming Majlis parliamentary elections should also be a concern. The Maldives' decision to invite the Xiangyang Hong 03 but not allow it more than a routine port call is a sign that quiet diplomacy is working. A rational approach is more likely to shore troubled bilateral ties out of the current crisis.